Ben Shapiro posted a video called Ben Shapiro's Top 5 Tips. Not anything regarding, like, top 5 tips. Like, what tips? Ben Shapiro Top 5 Tits.
I have a long history of debating.
You know the crowd is not with you.
I got that impression, yeah.
And
You think there's no systemic racism?
I believe that it depends on how you define systemic racism. When I debate, it's really not about tactics or tricks or anything like that. It really is more about trying to understand what the other person thinks and then critiquing what they think.
Number 1, Dennis Prager. Number 2, the Koch brothers. Both of them. His whole speech pattern is a tactic. Yeah, it literally is about tactics and tricks, and is absolutely not about understanding another person's perspective. Ben Shapiro doesn't give a shit about anyone's perspective that he's talked to. It's literally about humiliating them and, like, lying.
The same reason that Socrates had debates. The purpose is to elucidate ideas and bring ideas to the forefront.
Not at all. Why Ben Shapiro debates? I mean, it's to bring his ideas to the forefront. They're editing this like a fucking masterclass when all this guy does is sit on his computer and chirp and post on Twitter. He took a fucking lesson from the Jordan Peterson school of sucking yourself off.
This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN.
I will never work with ExpressVPN. They work with Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder. They're fucking pieces of shit. And if, you know, anyone's thinking about working with them, I highly advise against it. Did you guys know in Steven Crowder's Daily Wire contract, he lost a portion of his annual income because his sponsors got boycotted? I find that very interesting, and I highly doubt that that's in the terms of any other Daily Wire member's contract, and I highly doubt that's not something that we could weaponize potentially. Long and short, fuck ExpressVPN, because A, we shouldn't encourage companies to work with motherfuckers like this, and if you boycott the companies that these motherfuckers sponsor, chances are not only do they lose the sponsorships, but they can also lose money, as is in their contract in the Daily Wire, or with the Daily Wire. If he gets demonetized from YouTube, he loses 20%. He gets banned from Spotify, he loses another 20-25%. That is definitely not unique to Steven Crowder. I think it's in all their contracts, including Ben, because he has to have a contract, because he is also a performer. Maybe he doesn't. He doesn't have to. But for, like, tax purposes, he probably should.
Number 1, you have to ask questions for clarification. It is very important to understand exactly what your opponent is offering.
That's literally not why Ben asks questions. Ben literally asks questions as a gotcha so he can weaponize your own words against you later.
So, for example, you're talking to somebody and they say, you're a climate denier. You're denying climate change.
And then you sit there and you ask, what does climate mean? What does change mean? What do you mean by climate change? That's the Jordan Peterson tactic of, like, you ask me if I believe in God. Well, what do you mean by believe? And what do you mean by God? That's a real quote, by the way. He said that.
And you say to them, I need to understand exactly what you're claiming. Is a climate denier a person who says that there is no climate change happening, or is a climate denier a person who acknowledges that there is some climate change, but isn't sure how much of that is anthropogenic, right? How much of that is human caused, and also doesn't believe that the prescriptions that are being put out by the left are actively going to solve that problem. Right? I need to know exactly what it is that you're making a claim about. This happens all the time.
Yeah, this happens all the time. There's no clear definition of what a climate change denier is in, like, normal conversation. It's not self-explanatory either.
When it comes to healthcare,
every other Western developed country does some version of single payer. It obviously can be done, and it is done at lower rates and better coverage.
I love this being the left. Classic leftist Cenk Uygur who wanted to vote for fucking, what was it, Rick Caruso?
So, what is your ideal level of healthcare that is provided to everyone, and what sort of tax rate are you proposing to subsidize that?
Gish Galloping, Gish Galloping. And then he's like dodging the question. He's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna ask you a question I know you can't answer because you're not a fucking economist. You're just a person with, like, rational and logical sense. And Cenk will never say that because he's, you know... My dad is a climate denier, keeps the house at 60 and says it's not cold. That's how I live my life. I turn the heat off and open all the goddamn windows, and it's cold like a lizard.
I'll say, well, I'm in favor of nationalized healthcare. It's okay. What kind of nationalized healthcare are we talking about? Like, are we going to be arguing about the British NHS system, or are we going to be arguing about Singapore, which is largely privatized?
What do you mean? A nationalized healthcare system is the opposite of a privatized healthcare system. So what kind of blue are we talking about? Are we talking about light blue, or are we talking about red? That is the logic that he just put out. But he's using big terms that not a lot of people understand so he can get away with it.
If they're talking about income inequality, you say, well, what is it that you're chiefly concerned about?
So you think wealth inequality is bad? Name every problem with it. Like, no, dude.
Are you chiefly concerned about some people being very rich and others being slightly less rich?
No, actually. No, I'm concerned that like West Virginia is literally ranked at third world country conditions. There are people who just live in fucking rotting trailers and don't go to school.
And there could be a big gap? Or are you really worried about just poverty? Because that's sort of a different thing.
It doesn't matter. Income inequality and poverty are basically the same thing. He's like, are you worried about income inequality in a way that nobody's ever described it before? And you'll never see him say that in a debate unless it's with someone like Cenk Uygur who like has to play civility politics. But if he said that shit to me, I'd call him an idiot. Yeah, it's not clarification, it's obfuscation. He's trying to muddy the waters because he's a fucking rat. He just keeps finding more and more things to bring up to muddy the waters and get caught in definitions and semantics. This is also the same thing as being like, oh, I'm a climate change denier? What kind? What do you mean by that?
Second, don't accept your opponent's characterization of you. So when people don't have a good argument, very often what they go to is calling you names. They'll say that you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're a hater.
First of all, the right invented every slur. Let's just get that right. Because saying slurs, especially inventing them, is antithetical to how a leftist thinks, right? So you've already got that in the bank. But then we're talking about like classifications of like, well, all you need to do is be like, okay, Ben, define a bigot if you're not a bigot. Define a bigot. And then he'll be like, someone who has prejudice. And then you'd be like, okay, define prejudice. What do you mean? Prejudice in this sense or prejudice in apartheid sense? You could do the same thing to him.
Caitlyn Jenner, I'll call him Caitlyn Jenner.
No,
because
it's
that's
her. You're not being polite to the pronoun.
Because
disrespectful.
Okay.
Okay. That's just him getting owned. That's Ben Shapiro getting owned by manners and politeness.
The proper response to that is not what people typically do. When somebody calls you a bigot or a hater or a racist or anything like that,
She didn't call you any of those things. She just said you're being disrespectful, which is true.
very often your normal, natural human response is say, I'm not those things. I'm not a bigot. I'm not a racist. Why would you do that? Why would you say that? That is not the proper response. Because you denying that you're a bigot means that they're a reasonable person calling you a bigot, which suggests that a reasonable person might think you're a bigot.
He's not talking or even thinking about why he was called a bigot, and rather he's trying to find justifications for how he's not, while simultaneously downplaying and exaggerating the person making the claim. This is the opposite of good faith. Everything he's doing is inherently bad faith because he's not addressing the arguments, he's addressing the semantics and the context the arguments are being made in, which is fucking pointless if you're trying to actually have a conversation and spread information and exchange ideas. This is insane.
If somebody calls you a bigot, you say, that's not true and you're an asshole.
Forget about the disrespect. Facts don't care about your feelings.
That is the actual proper response to that because they're attacking you as a human being.
Ben is literally saying his feelings got hurt. So he says facts don't care about your fucking feelings. Like, if you're gonna be a bigot, just own it. Just own it. Just be like like even motherfuckers in the KKK will be like, I'm not racist, I'm just right. And that's what Ben Shapiro does.
For example, gender identity disorder, that's the DSM-4, bro. We use the DSM-5 now for psychologists to be able to talk
I literally
about...
cited the DSM-5 in the speech, and it's called gender dysphoria, which is
I
the term
literally
that I
said-
use throughout the speech, not gender
You
identity
sound like a
disorder,
bozo,
which is how it's
bro.
identified
And you
in
get
the
no
DSM-4.
pee, and you can't even make your wife wet, bro, so what's good?
The reason he's resorting to calling him insults is because A, it's satisfying because he is an actual fucking loser. But B, it's because Ben Shapiro is Gish Galloping, lying, like, you know, getting boiled down into semantics rather than addressing the actual argument, which is a surefire way to get someone really fucking frustrated really fast. That's Ben Shapiro's tactic. He skirts your arguments, dodges your questions, attacks your semantics to frustrate you and then get you to say something like this. That's how he gets the snowflake meltdown. He's essentially gaslighting you. It's awesome.
They're deliberately avoiding discussing the issue. They're much more focused on going after you personally. It's a real misdirect, and it's where you can make big mistakes, right? I mean, the big mistake is to get your back up and to get offended, and that's the goal of this particular game.
The fact that he actually has the gall to say this shit as it's literally his exact tactic is fucking crazy to me.
Third, don't get distracted. Don't let your opponent change topics. So people on the left particularly like to shift the argument from one topic to another when they are pressed on the argument. So here's an example of this.
That's literally what conservatives do. Maybe he uses a tactic because he genuinely believes everyone else thinks this way. No, it's dishonest. He does it on purpose. He knows what he's doing because he's able to point it out when other people do it.
Roy Teixeira just wrote a piece, the emerging Democrat majority, Roy Teixeira, he just wrote a piece about what he called the Fox News fallacy, a tendency of people on the left to believe that just because Fox News mentions something, it can't be real. The reality is a lot of this stuff is taught in schools.
You mean like viruses? Well, okay.
Well,
Can I?
now I'm just.
I don't know.
Now I'm just.
Oh my God, this is just a Ben Shapiro getting owned compilation.
You think that you are arguing about, for example, same-sex marriage and whether men should marry men and women should marry women and whether that is the moral and utilitarian equivalent of a man marrying a woman.
Ben Shapiro is just back on his 2007 bullshit. Ben Shapiro is literally like, no, gay marriage actually isn't cool. I feel like he was not this open about it 2 years ago. That's crazy.
And they immediately shift to, what about an old man marrying an old woman? Well, that's kind of a change of topic. That
It's not a change of topic. It's the same topic. It's just a different example. Like, he just doesn't get it.
That does not actually answer the question as to why a man and a man are the same thing as a man and a woman.
They're not the same. But it doesn't matter is the point. He doesn't know how to address arguments honestly in any context. So what he does instead is make up an argument that you're making. He's just like telling you you're saying something else because that's what he can address. Ironically, changing the topic.
You'll be talking about the fact that the police do not disproportionately shoot and kill black men.
They don't? They don't. They don't? They don't? What do you mean they don't? That's not a topic of debate. That's just a statistic. Like, yeah, there's more white people that get killed by the police, but there's more white people in general. The percentage of black people versus the percentage of white people is where there's a huge disparity.
And they'll immediately shift to, well, what about slavery? So, well, we can talk about slavery. We can talk about the root causes of crime. We can talk about all those things. But that's not what we're talking about right now.
He's just doing a straw man. He's just being like, leftists say stupid stuff, right? When it's like, I've never heard someone talk like this before. Maybe like college freshmen that have never debated anyone before and have poor social skills.
Fourth, you have to point out contradictions in arguments that are brought about by your opponent's refusal to be clear in their definitions.
That's just semantics. He's just saying do semantics because it's really annoying.
So people on the left very often will bring out an argument that is vague and that appears to be internally coherent, but when you actually drill down on the definitions, is totally incoherent. So this is particularly true in the arena of gender. So here's my question. It's an argument that my friend Matt Walsh likes to make. What is a woman? Define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
So this is actually a logical fallacy called a red herring. You're asking me a question in order to actually challenge my question without actually
No, it isn't. I'm saying
answering
that it really is not. I'm saying that biology. They will not.
It is. Yeah. No, it is. He's literally getting owned right now. That person made him stutter and completely start talking about something else.
They will not specifically define gender or sex because the moment that they do, it becomes clear that their definitions are completely contradictory.
That's also actually only true of conservatives because conservatives can't tell the difference between gender and sex. Otherwise, their entire ideology falls apart.
So they will say that gender is completely independent of sex. But at the same time, gender is biological and sex is somehow assigned.
No, he just doesn't understand. No, gender is assigned.
No way.
And sex is biological.
Or they'll make the claim that gender is more important than biological sex.
Important to who? What do you mean important?
And therefore, we should identify you by your self-identified gender and not by your biological sex.
Biological sex is irrelevant in most conversations. I guess that's what he means by important. Biological sex is not like how you refer to anything. That's just like the only person that should know your biological sex, I guess, is your doctor. Because your gender is what is your expression.
Maybe my most famous argument in sort of the Shapiro destroys category is a conversation that I had with a college student in which she was claiming that you could change your gender. And I was saying, well, but you're saying that gender is biologically ingrained, so how can you change it? And she refused to be clear in her definition, so I brought an analog, and the analog was age.
Yeah, biological age and biological gender, which is just not a real thing, are the same. That's what he's trying to say. You can't change your age, so you can't change your gender. All right?
Let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are, okay? Because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So
I'm 22, so I'm probably young and naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60?
Is it?
She's just confused. This isn't You're not destroying anything.
Why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just.
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender.
That was the argument that he made. Not only does that sound very strange, it also doesn't make any sense.
Fifth, don't get defensive. Okay, this is the biggest one. So I tend to be pretty unflappable in debate. I tend to be pretty removed, but you can catch me on an off day. It's happened before. The most obvious example is that time that I was on the BBC. You know, I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer. So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time.
All
sir.
right.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
Oh, he was just having an off day. Okay, he's not a complete idiot.
People tend to think that debate is about shouting down the other guy or being more angry than the other guy. That's not true.
No, it's about being more passive-aggressive than the other guy. That's really what he's saying.
Debate and discussion too, productive discussion, is about actually being open to the position of the other person, so much so that you're willing to internalize it, understand it, and then agree or disagree with that. When you do that, you can become a really, really good debater.
Ben Shapiro doesn't understand any argument from someone he's engaged with, as evident by the fact that he was put into a corner by asking, he asked the question that put him in the corner to the point where he was like, age is more important than gender, which just doesn't make any sense in or out of context. As a debate coach, I love this video. If Ben Shapiro made a masterclass, I would buy it in a heartbeat. Ben Shapiro made a masterclass, I would also buy it in a heartbeat. This is pretty bad, man. Pretty bad.